Permanent Ink by Maxine on AO3. Chapter 12. The days were steadily passing by. Katsuki tried telling himself he didn't care, that he wasn't nervous, that he was, in fact, totally and completely fine. That was definitely a lie, though. There was a creeping feeling of dread slowly building in his chest. The wall of helplessness that settled over him was even worse. He hated it. It sent him on edge, had him snapping at everyone in a way that he hadn't since they were brand new first-year students. His friends started to tread lightly around him, keeping their interactions carefully controlled. Kirishima kept throwing him worried looks. Even Kaminari was fucking trying to watch his mouth, clearly thinking twice about every word he said. And that was actually horrible. He could end all of this right now by ripping the patch off and showing his arm to Deku's face, but he couldn't make himself do it. He wasn't actually sure that would help anything. They both still wanted to see Deku's words as confirmation, as proof. And wouldn't that just make Deku as anxious as he was while they waited? That would actually be a dick move, right? And would it take something away from Deku if he told him ahead of time? Would it dampen the experience of waiting for his words to appear? What the fuck was the actual protocol here? They were 11 days to go when Kirishima and Mina intersected suddenly came back to haunt him. What if Deku wasn't his soulmate? What if his words were just some shitty opening line from someone else in the future? What if all this panic was for nothing? That didn't feel right, though. He remembered what Kaminari had claimed, that the sentence on his arm was somehow familiar, even if it hadn't been said yet. Katsuki thought maybe he understood. He could feel it in his bones that his words were linked to Deku. With so many other things to doubt, it wasn't worth it to add that to the pile. There was no point in trying to pretend that this wasn't happening. Not anymore. Deku was his soulmate, and 9 days before his birthday, while Katsuki was sitting in the room, taking one deep, slow breath after another, with his All Might plushie squished against his chest, he finally came to the realization that he was okay with that. Something inside of him uncoiled. It was okay. He couldn't really examine it beyond that yet, but that was fine. They would figure it out. It wasn't the end of the world. Deku would probably be fine with it too. They didn't have to be whatever, more than what they were now. Maybe one day, but they didn't have to. Maybe they could just keep existing as they were now. They had a good thing going on recently, didn't they? They could continue to support each other as they grew as heroes. That could work. Their relationship was already so kind of weird, so what if they had one more thing to link them together? One more hugely important, potentially life-altering thing. It took the edge off for a little, at least. The dread was still there, but it had calmed down a bit. All of it felt less overwhelming as they headed into the final week. Katsuki wondered if maybe he actually just entered some kind of fugue state. He felt like he was watching time barrel onwards without really participating in it. Attending classes and doing work became mechanical. He was going through the motions, but that was about it. He fidgeted more, couldn't stop his knee from bouncing whenever he was sitting somewhere for more than a minute or two. Sweat kept gathering at his palms, and he was continuously letting off small, harmless explosions to clean it off. It sounded like a fucking popcorn machine when anybody asked about it. He blamed it on swampy July heat. Deku heard him tell someone that one day and shot him a concerned look. They were inside after all. UA did have air conditioning. Katsuki ignored him. Sero slid up to him when they were 6 days left and asked Katsuki if he thought Deku would mind if he asked out Uraraka. "It's not like I've got some kind of bro code with him, you know?" he said, arms crossed behind his head, as they walked back to the dorms. "And I don't think she's gonna want to hang out around on his birthday, so I thought maybe I could take her out for ramen or something." "How the fuck should I know?" Katsuki murmured. "It's Deku. He'd probably tell you to go ahead even if he did give a shit." "It could be just a friend date," Sarah tried, and Katsuki rolled his eyes. "He's not gonna care." "You sure?" Katsuki lifted one shoulder in reply. He was pretty sure. Actually, if anything, Deku would probably be happy for them. 4 days to go. He saw Deku and Roundface talking after class. It seemed stilted, but Uraraka had a determined expression on her face. Deku just looked relieved. Their voices were hushed. Katsuki donned while putting his books away, and by the time he slugged his bag over his shoulder, Uraraka was laughing at something Deku said. He grinned back at her, and Katsuki let out her breath. Finally. Thank fuck. 2 more days had gone by in a blink of an eye when Katsuki bumped into Deku after one of the boys was coming from an evening run. Actually, to be accurate, he bumped into what was the fucking wall outside the kitchen. He was on his way to grab a drink when Deku came through the front entrance. The stupid nerd was using the bottle of his shirt to wipe the sweat off his face, and Katsuki promptly did a double take, zeroing in on the light trail of hair below his nape. And the next thing he knew, he smacked the side of his head into a goddamn door jamb. Whoa, said Jiro from the inside of the kitchen. Katsuki looked over before he could remember to be embarrassed by his rare display of dumbassery, and saw her sitting on one of the counters with a cup of tea in her hand. Yamamomo was sitting near her with her own mug, looking slightly concerned. He wasn't sure if it was better or worse that the amused Jiro was currently broadcasting. Kaminari really rubbed off on you, huh? Are you alright? Yamamomo asked. Ah, now Katsuki was fucking embarrassed. His cheeks flared red as he scrubbed at one of that had become acquaintance with the Jordan, and grunted at the pair of them. I'm fine. Jiro peered at something over Katsuki's shoulders, and understand dawned on her face. She snickered a little. Midoriya again? Die, Katsuki snapped. He yanked the door frame open and snatched us up a sports drink. That's unnecessary, Yomu murmured. Deku walked into the kitchen and gave them all a bright grin. Hey guys, he said, grabbing a glass from one of the cabinets and filling it with water from the sink. Yomu smiled back at him. Good workout? Oh, I just went for a jog, he said, somewhat sheepish. Needed to burn off some energy. Jiro let out a soft sound, her eyebrows lifting a bit. Oh yeah, tomorrow night, right? Yep, Deku said. His voice had gone high and breathy, and he drew up his bottom lip between his teeth for a moment. Kind of snuck up on me. I'm sure you'll get good news, Yamamomo tried to assure him. Katsuki made some kind of half-assed attempt to blend in with the refrigerator, or at the very least stand as still as possible so that everybody would forget he was there. Tomorrow night somehow sounded much more worse than 2 more days, which was how he'd been thinking about it. But of course, Deku would stay awake tomorrow. Of course. He'd wait until midnight to see what the words appeared on his arms. Jiro chose that moment to look directly at him, which ruined his attempts to magically vanish to the floor or some shit. He'd kill for that Togetsu's quirk right now. Whoever you get should consider themselves lucky, she said, eye sliding back to Deku. Not gonna lie, Midoriya, you're looking pretty fit lately. Yamamomo nodded, her ponytail bobbling gently. You've been working out hard these past few months. Deku flushed and palmed the back of his head, looking awkward as fuck but trying to laugh it off. Thank you. Don't you think so, Bakugo? Jiro was looking at him again. Her grin was downright evil, and Katsuki was definitely gonna have to kill her later. He's really buckling up. Katsuki lifted his drink to his mouth. I can still kick his ass, he murmured from behind it. You're welcome to try, Deku said, lacing onto their familiar banter in an instant. Eyes went wide and bright with an eager light to them. Katsuki absently let his gaze roam for the rest of his body, taking in his broad shoulders, the strong muscles evident between his fucking shirt. It had sweat proof written across the front of it, but it was a heather gray color, and he'd just been out running in the dead-ass middle of June, which meant huge fucking patches of it were drenched. It was gross. Katsuki hated him so much. Deku was still talking, oblivious to the way Katsuki couldn't stop dragging his eyes over every inch of him. Fuck, his stupid fucking toned legs. We do have a gym date tomorrow. That got his attention. Date? He repeated, like a goddamn idiot. He knew Deku was just referring to their sessions with All Might. Deku blinked, looking unconcerned, his mouth hanging open the tiniest bit, and Katsuki immediately tried to backtrack. Never mind, shut up, he said abruptly. I know what you meant. You fucking stink. Go take a shower already. Wow, Jiro dawned, brows hiking up again, as Deku splurted. You're such a charmer. No wonder Kaminari went out with you. Bakugo, really? Yamamoto said, cupping her cheeks with a hand and looking slightly embarrassed, on Deku's behalf. Should you, of all people, be commenting on that? Katsuki bristled. The hell is that supposed to mean? Your quirk literally revolves around you sweating, Jiro said, her tone dry. Okay, fuck off. It's more like nitroglycerin. He thrusted a hand out so he could somehow show them, which was all the less useless. So it smells almost like... Wait, fuck. Burnt sugar, Deku offered. Both Yamamoto and Jiro slowly turned to stare at him. He fidgeted for a moment, color bleeding into his face, all over again, and then he downed the rest of the water and quickly dumped his glass in the sink. I think I'll go take a shower now. Okay, bye! He hightailed it out of the kitchen before anyone could comment, which had Jiro bursting into another round of snickers. Burnt sugar, oh my god, classic. I've never thought about it like that before, but I think he's actually right, Yamamoto said. Fascinating. Bakugo, Jiro forced out through her laughter, and even Yamamoto giggled at that. Holy shit, I'm out of here, Katsuki grumbled. He stomped away from them before they could say any more stupid shit. The next day, their gym date, complete with All Might as a chaperone, was a hot mess. With only a few hours to go, it was clear none of them could concentrate on what they were doing. Deku was more distracted than Katsuki was, but at least that meant his own questionable performance wasn't really donning any odd looks from All Might. The man was clearly more concerned with Deku, particularly when Katsuki managed to catch him off guard with his age-old right hook maneuver. Katsuki had even used that move was a clear sign that his heart wasn't really in the moment. He normally tried his damn hardest to win every time they fought, and Deku had proven time and time again that he could dodge that attack. But he didn't this time, and the explosion sent him lurching sideways a few feet. He staggered a little, trying for maybe a second or two to catch his balance and right himself, but in the end he just let himself drop into the mats and laid there on his back, panting up at the ceiling. All Might stood over him, skinny arms propped on his bony hips. Forgive me for saying so, young Midoriya, but it appears you're having a hard time focusing today. I'm sorry, Deku groaned. Tomorrow, it's my 17th. Ah! All Might grinned and held out a hand to help him up. Say no more. How about we call it here for the night? Probably for the best. Deku turned a worried look in Katsuki's direction. Sorry, Kachan. There was nothing Katsuki wanted to do more than lock himself in his bedroom for the rest of the night, so this was absolutely fine by him. But he made a show to cross his arms and scowl. Whatever. Perhaps young Bakugo can escort you to the dorms? All Might suggested, as if they weren't both definitely going that way anyway. Katsuki rolled his eyes, but he waited for Deku to gather his shit before the two of them headed outside. Deku was quiet for several minutes, and Katsuki let him be. It wasn't until they were about halfway back that the other boy finally spoke. Was it like this for you? What do you mean? Just, Deku exhaled. I feel like I'm about to vibrate out of my own skin or something. Katsuki snorted. Scared? No, Deku said immediately, shaking his head. No, it's not that. All this waiting might kill me, though. Weak. Katsuki glanced at him, smirking. But then his gaze drifted away, and he sighed. No, I didn't give a shit the night before my birthday. Oh, that's right. You said that you didn't even read your words until the next morning. Katsuki grunted an affirmative. Wow, Deku said. I have no idea how you managed that. I didn't think I cared, Katsuki admitted. It didn't seem like a big deal. I figured whatever the fuck my words ended up being, it wouldn't change anything. Deku felt silent again. They were near the 2A dormitories now. You were wrong, though, he said eventually. Right? Katsuki frowned. Yeah, I guess. You actually do know who your soulmate is, don't you? They climbed up the stairs of the dormitory before both of them slowed to a halt. Katsuki's heart thumped against his ribcage, and he just kind of stared at the door in front of them for a long moment. And then he forced himself to look at Deku. Yes. Deku nodded, his breath seeming off, unsteady, a bit shaky. That's why you went to Kaminari. You weren't interested in relationships until you saw your words, and then everything changed. You used them as a test run? Something like that, Katsuki murmured. A test run. A learning experience. Practice. Whatever you want to call it. He just needed to get himself on some kind of level playing field with Deku. He needed to go into this as his equal, which was dumb. It was so dumb. In the end, did it really fucking matter? Honestly, what was the point of making sure he knew how to kiss someone? And why had he put so much effort into trying to figure it out if he could just casually interact with Deku? He cooked for him, he hung out with him outside school, and trained, and their work studies had forced himself to open up at least a little. And he spent more time than he cared to admit, going over everything in his head. All the little details, what he knew about Deku, his looks, his personality, what they were to each other now. He couldn't make himself think about their past, not beyond the little they already addressed, and their future was terrifying unknown. But what was the point of all of that if he wasn't trying to prepare himself for this? If he wasn't trying to explore their compatibility and get himself to a place where he could mentally accept that they were soulmates? The future might be terrifyingly unknown, and it had taken him 3 months to get here. But Katsuki thought that maybe he was finally ready to face it. He wanted to. He wanted Deku. Katsuki wanted that fucking nerd more than he'd ever wanted anything in his entire life. The intensity and the abruptness of the feeling that slammed into him were overwhelming. Katsuki swayed a little and reached out to steady himself against something. His hand landed on the door, and to cover his sudden shakiness, he propped up for the handle so he could pull it out and open and stepped inside. Are you going to bed? Deku asked. There was something in his voice that Katsuki forced himself to ignore. Something hopeful. Maybe a little anxious? Yeah, he croaked. He glanced back at Deku for a second. Just a second. He let his expression soften. I'll see you in the morning, though? Come wish me a happy birthday? Deku said. I'll tell you what my words say. It sounded like a promise, like something he would look forward to. Katsuki didn't reply. He left Deku there, headed for the showers instead. His thoughts were strangely quiet for a moment, for the first time in days. He went about his business, his mind carefully blanked as he cleaned up and changed into a new pair of gym shorts and a fresh shirt. Then he made the trip back to his room and collapsed onto his bed. For a long, long while he just laid there and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. He's tired, but it was a fruitless endeavor. His skin felt like it was blazing. A restless kind of energy thumped through his veins as he tossed and turned, adjusted his position, and then readjusted it again after that. He couldn't get comfortable. He wasn't tired. Oh, who was he fooling? Katsuki lasted about 2 hours before heaving himself up and slamming out of his room. It wasn't that late, only about 10 p.m., so he assumed there would still be a group of people down in the common room, and he wasn't incorrect. Kirishima, Kaminari, and Mina were all there. Sarah wasn't, and obviously Uraraka wasn't either. And both Ida and Todoroki were sitting on either sides of Deku on one of the couches. Ojiro and Jiro were on one end of the other, with Amamori just lurching just behind. Deku was the first one to notice him, because of course he was. He straightened up, eyes going slightly wide when he spotted him. It might not happen right at midnight, Kaminari was saying. My words didn't show up until like an hour later. It varies, Amamo said, but if it puts your mind at ease, Mia's words were very prompt. I fell asleep before mine showed up, Ojiro admitted, laughing in self-deprivation. I meant to stay awake, but it hit 3 and I just gave up. I didn't even bother, Katsuki spoke up. There were startled sounds from around the room as everyone spun to look at him. Some of them threw out greetings. Most of them looked surprised to see him. Kirishima grinned and immediately shifted over on the couch to make room. He gave him the corner that put him closest to Deku, because all his friends were actually sneaky assholes. But Katsuki just toured over and dropped into the open spot without drawing attention to it. It actually put him nearest to Todoroki since he was the one at the other end of the couch. Aren't you usually in bed by now? Kaminari asked, leaning around Mina to speak to him. Wasn't tired, Katsuki replied. Thought I'd come see what all you losers were doing. We were talking about soulmates, Todoroki said, as if that wasn't the most obvious thing in the fucking world. I still think that Midoriya's words are going to be something from Ochako. Said a floating t-shirt that could only be Hakakuri. Katsuki hadn't even realized she was there, but apparently she was, sitting on the floor near one of the coffee tables. Deku chuckled a little, sounding somewhat pained. I really don't think so. It's like a movie, Hakakuri insisted. This is the plot of all of the rom-coms. Midoriya breaks up with her was the dramatic twist of the second act, but it all comes together in the end. Katsuki scoffed at that, slumping back on the couch cushions and crossed his arms over his chest. Girl, I tried that movie shit with Bakugo already, Mina said, flapping her hands dismissively. I told him his words could be really sweet, meet cute, and just gotta glare for my efforts. Boys don't get it. That's because most movies are not accurate depictions of real life, Ida announced, as Jiro snorted at the same time and said, Your first mistakes was saying anything involved Bakugo could be sweet. Oi! Katsuki said, snapping, glowering at her, and she held her hands up apologetically. Sorry, except for how he smells, of course. That got him a mixture of giggles and odd looks from all around the room. Todoroki, the very definition of unsubtle, leaned over and sniffed the air around him, which made Katsuki snarl and throw a hand in his direction, sparks embering flying from his palms. You ever try to smell me again and I'll fucking kill you half and half, he growled. Todoroki ignored him. I'm detecting hints of lavender. You're not detecting shit. Take that back. Dude, chill, Kirishima said, chuckling a little. You smell super manly. It's fine. She's talking about my quirk, Katsuki growled out. Not my fucking shampoo or something. Of course, Ida explained. He adjusted his glasses. Your sweat is similar to nitroglycerin, so it would make sense if it had left a scent comparable to that of burning sugar. Jiro huffed out a breath. Damn, it was way more entertaining when Midoriya was the one who said that. Wait, for reals? Kaminari shifted his knees, lifting up so that he could see Katsuki over the top of Mina's head and Kirishima's. Is that why you smell like caramel all the time? Holy shit, that makes so much more sense. I was wondering what the heck type of cologne you always had on. It's so cute that you think he had cologne on for you, Mina said, giggling. Right, so coming down here was clearly a huge fucking mistake. Katsuki grumbled, about to push himself up from the couch and disappear right back into his room, but Deku made a weird little sound that stretched out a hand on top of him. Hang on, wait, you just got here, Kachan, don't leave yet. Katsuki paused. He was already half out of his seat. I wasn't, he said, and tried to make his absorbed escape look like it was just changing positions by putting his foot onto the cushion and tucking it beneath his other leg. It wasn't the smoothest thing he'd ever done, but it seemed to work. The conversation moved on from what Katsuki smelled like, thank the fuck, and gradually people started wandering off to bed. Best of luck, Midoriya, Ida said as he took his leave. I'm sure you have great news to share with us tomorrow. Hatsuki was behind him, possibly bouncing up and down on her knees, if her bobbling clothes were anything to go by. I'm rooting for you, she cried. Jiro just gave Katsuki a long look before she walked out, her eyebrows raised and a smirk playing on her lips. Mina left with her, though she dove across Kirishima's lap to throw her arm around Katsuki before she did. Good luck, she whispered excitedly into his ear, and then smacked a sloppy kiss to his cheek. For fuck's sakes. He grimacely wiped at that spot, and Mina just laughed and ruffled his hair before practically skipping over to the other room. When it was down to just Kirishima, Kaminari, and Todoroki, there were about 40 minutes left until midnight. Kirishima finally lost his patience and abruptly shot up his feet. Hey, Todoroki, I wanted to ask you something. Todoroki tipped his head to the side and glanced at him. Oh, yeah, but not here, Kirishima said, looking around awkwardly and trying to not meet anyone's eyes. Can we go upstairs? Icy Hot was still the most oblivious person on the entire goddamn planet, so he kept his ass planted on the seat with a vague, confused, and somewhat suspicious look on his face until Deku finally told him to get the fuck out. Except, more nicely than that, because he wasn't Katsuki. It's okay, Deku said, a wide grin plastered across his face that didn't look the less bit real. Really, it's fine. I'll see you in the morning. Todoroki looked at him for a moment. His eye slid towards Katsuki briefly, then to Kirishima, who was still hovering impatiently beside the couch, before they returned back to Deku. All right, he murmured, pushing himself up. Happy birthday, Midoriya. Kaminari had stood as well while that was happening, and he slid out his fist in Katsuki's direction. Katsuki bumped it with his own as subtly as he could, holding Kaminari's gaze out of the corner of his eyes for a moment, and then the three of them left. It was very, very quiet. Katsuki cleared his throat. You planning on staying up? Yeah. Deku glanced down at the blank, smooth skin of his arm. Definitely. Put something on, Katsuki said, nodding towards the TV. I'll sit with you. The minutes ticked by. Deku flipped through the channels and chose some random action movie that Katsuki had never seen before, but it didn't matter because it wasn't like he was actually watching it. He might have zoned out a little, just staring blankly ahead of him, waiting. At one point, Deku went to get a drink from the kitchen. He sat down next to Katsuki when he came back, which was probably the entire reason he'd even made an excuse to get up in the first place. The digital clock beneath the TV blinked unhelpfully at them. The display shifted, counting each passing second, changing from 11:57 p.m. to 11:58 p.m. to 11:59 p.m. until finally, after what had been the longest minute in actual fucking history, the number flipped to 12 a.m. Both of them immediately looked down at Deku's arm, but there was nothing there. Deku snorted. This is actually torture. I'm not waiting all damn night, Katsuki said. He rested his head back against the couch. Tell your words to hurry the fuck up. Sure, Kachan, I'll get right on that. Give me that. Katsuki snatched the water bottle out of Deku's hands and sold it apart. Happy birthday, I guess. Thanks, Deku murmured. He kept trailing his finger over the side of his forearm. Katsuki vaguely wondered what time his own words had shown up. He remembered Kaminari saying he'd had to wait about an hour, but before that, he never really thought about the fact that they didn't just immediately appear. He guessed maybe he hadn't known. It was probably some bit of information that he absolutely thought ominous at one point. What had Tail Guy said? His words didn't show up until after 3 a.m. Katsuki absolutely did not have it in him to wait that long. He would explode long before that happened. Probably literally. Luckily for them, it was only a little over an hour later that Deku made a soft sound from beside him. Katsuki had started to doze off by then. The TV was playing late night commercials on a loop. The movie they had on ended a while ago. Katsuki barely looked over to Deku, who found him staring rapidly at his arm. He jerked upright, his heart lurching up into his throat, and a prickle tingling from across his skin. Deku splayed him a glance, but his eyes went right back to the writing that was slowly appearing on his forearm. Katsuki leaned across him and grabbed his wrist so that he could yank him into a position that made it easier for them to watch. Deku let him, letting their heads bow together, their intermixed breath gradually picking up at pace. He didn't know what he had expected, that maybe the words would appear as someone was actually writing them one letter at a time, or that they would suddenly flash into existence all at once. Nothing there 1 second, and then a full sentence the next. What actually happened was that they bloomed slowly in pieces, like a darkening bruise making itself known. A stroke here, a curve there, no one word more legible than the rest until everything was visible. Dark writing, a scrawled against a pale backdrop. Deku let out a shaky exhale. Katsuki's brows furrowed. Go take a swan dive off the roof. For a second, he was just confused. There was ringing in his ear and nothing made sense. That was. He hadn't said that. Had he? Was Deku not his soulmate? When the actual fuck had someone told him to? Deku was saying something, trying to get his attention. He held his hand wrapped around Katsuki's wrist now, his grip tightening, arm tuned down at his words weren't showing. Kachan, he said, shaking him, his eyes worried. Worried? Like they've been that day. It came all slamming back into him. The sludge villain. Deku squirted out of the crowd, throwing his bag, crawling at the slime that had been surrounding Katsuki, choking him and suffocating him. But it was more than that. It was much more. That day hadn't started and ended with Katsuki being attacked. Everything else had seemed small and insignificant after the whole incident, after All Might showed up and bailed them out. He shoved everything else aside, buried it all and forgotten about it. He couldn't bear to think about how Deku had actually had the nerve to try and save him after Katsuki had spit in his face and told him to. He shot up from the couch, breaking away from Deku and stumbling backwards. His head licked the coffee table, and he tried to skid around. Wait, Deku said, desperate, reaching out for him. Kachan, wait! Katsuki shook his head and forced him to his feet, stepping away as quickly as he could. He couldn't breathe. It was like there was sludge being slammed down his throat all over again, thick and putrid and horror. Fuck! He swallowed, turning back halfway to glance at his shoulder, but he couldn't meet Deku's eyes. He couldn't. You should cover that up, he said weakly. It's not. You deserve better. Deku deserves so much better. Katsuki winced and squeezed his eyes shut. Fuck. He left, like a fucking coward, staged over to the elevator and jammed the button until the doors opened and he could slip inside. He ended up slumped against one of the walls, hunched over, hands buried in his hair and gripping tight. He didn't know what to do. His emotions were spiraling, his chest hurt. Fuck, 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 fuck! Surprise! The words were, go take a swan dive off the roof. I remember when I first found that out, I was shell-shocked. I was the whiplash. Okay, so Bakugo, during the 2-week time span of just like feeling like out of body, like he's doing the movements, he's in class and whatever, but he's not there. I experienced that a lot. The whole I'm there, but I'm not really there. Sometimes I'm daydreaming, some other times I'm just there, but I'm not there, you know? Okay, the way Bakugo, when looking at Deku, just slammed onto the door frame. I want to make fun of him, but I can't, because at least he has the excuse of, you know, looking at his crush. I, on the other hand, do it on a daily basis because I'm a dumbass who has no spatial awareness. This was a very emotional chapter. Like, super emotional. Like, Jesus Christ. I think he actually started having a panic attack at the end of the chapter. Like, the whole going back to the sludge villain, not being able to breathe. That was, like, the big thing that made me think, oh, he's probably having a panic attack right now. Anxiety attack, something. Like, obviously he's not at the right mental space. And the whole not being able to breathe. I love fanfics when they touch about Bakugo having PTSD from that, because there is no way that he's not mentally scarred from almost being killed through suffocation. Like, I do not care how mentally okay you are, that fucks people up. Also, I kind of sort of agree with Bakugo. You should probably cover up your words, because I don't think your friends are gonna be very happy that your soulmate told you to kill yourself. So yeah, maybe this is a good time to cover up your words, because that is not something to boast about. My best friend who made my profile picture is doing art commissions for just $10. If you're interested, contact them at Roji. That is RROJI. As always, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds, and have a wonderful day or night. Join our community server, link in the description, subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.